Hello. Oh, well, I haven't used this streaming rig for a long time. Hey, everyone, we're back! Yeah! Oh, we had this great intro, too, that we did.
It's some sort of Dave Matthews singing.
Yeah. All right, we're not going to recreate that for you.
You're watching DisOrganized play.
Wait, that's my bluegrass
Yeah.
opening. Yeah, so, hey, I'm Tom Lommel. I'm your Dungeon Master and host for Disorganized Play. This, as you know, is Eric Reichert. We're going to talk about last night's session. We're going to take some DM questions, potentially. We're going to talk about Eric's little mini campaign that he run. We're broadcasting live from my kitchen because Dom has gotten this come down with a flu bug, maybe, potentially. He's sick. Neither of us are sick, and we don't want to get involved in being sick.
It's like you can still come to the studio, and we're like, nah.
Yeah. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. Appreciate it. Our topics today, I want to break last night's session really into kind of just two parts. The fight that we had down in the dungeon area of the tower, and then the negotiations that we had with Santahar, right? So we're going to talk about those two things from the game last night, and then we're going to take a look back, kind of like a review of Eric's mini campaign that he ran, Lords of Greyhaven, that just wrapped before the new year, right before the holidays. So those are things we're going to talk about. Yeah, there's no lawnmowers here, thank God. It is a much nicer setup. The only thing is, like, I'm on the wireless. This is going to be a test of the new cable and see so far 0 dropped frames. Yeah, 0 dropped frames, which is great. So that's the groovy coolness. So yeah, if you have questions about your game or DMing or what's going on in our game, some of the stuff, some of the spoilery stuff, we're gonna save for Tuesday. If you have specific questions about Ironkeep Chronicles, but because Eric's here. But that's fine. That's absolutely fine. If you have other questions about GMing, we're happy to answer those as well. So, without any further ado, let's just talk, in high level about some of the events last night. Let's start with I never like to poison the well with like what the DM thought. So,
Yeah.
What was your impression of? We started off and had basically like this kind of interaction with the keeper of the tower, with Ailerod, his weird kind of dream persona, and then he sent you into the dungeon to like rescue his servant who had been imprisoned by the previous tenant, the Arathor Killraven. So that quickly turned into fight the guardian of the prison that he had left down there. So what was what's your takeaway from that, like how that went down?
I thought it was good because I mean when you said like there's people guarding it, like I initially I just assumed we got the keys to the tower, everything's fine, we live here, everything's perfect, and you're like, oh no, there's he left some people down there, and I wasn't sure what to expect from the actual fight. I thought like, oh, we'll fight like humans or humanoids of some description, not like giant, weird, crazy, like, what's the craziest thing I can find in the Tome of Beasts? Which was fun.
What's the craziest level appropriate thing? Like, that's the hard part.
Yeah.
Like, I'll either see something that's really cool in that book, and it's like, CR 1/4, and I'm like, oh, well, I can't use it. Or it'll be CR 15, and I'm like, I will destroy them with that monster if I put that in
I've
there.
had that issue, too.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was nice because it was like finding some interesting things we hadn't seen before, but definitely fit into the world of Killraven's sort of like corrupt nature, and the environment was fun. We don't often play a lot with environments in just like random fights. It's usually like whatever, you're in a plat flame, or maybe there's like a barrel in the way you can hide behind. But like the whole like you're on a spiral staircase and like it's a spider, so it can go just about anywhere, but you guys can't was interesting because like. My first action, I was like, I guess I'll bless anyone because I can't
get there. I can't get there fast enough, right? Yeah, it's interesting because it's like fighting in a hallway, but you're not in a hallway.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I thought that was certainly a baller move to just, all right, I want to drop off and try and attack this thing. And I think the tricky part about that, right, is that is a natural instinct for every player, right? Is like, oh, I want to do the really cool thing where I dive on the guy with my sword. And the rules do not support that at all. Like not in a reasonable way. And I thought like I found my way there. Like how do I facilitate this cool thing that you want to do, which should be cool?
Yeah, I mean it definitely like you do give us the opportunity to like do something that is outside of what the game mechanics probably want us to do, but is fun to do and interesting to do a lot. And it's not like all the time, but it certainly in situations like this where it's a fight that it doesn't matter in like the long term of like the storytelling, but it's just like something for us fun to do, like a fun little activity. Like, yeah, we'll have a little fun with this, but
Right.
like if it were like the end boss, you're like, I want to do this. I was like, you'll die if you do that.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of, I don't know. It's such a tough. We faced the same thing though in a boss fight. You know, when you were in the weird silver safe hold, right?
Yeah.
Where it was like Havana wanted to like do all of these like push, dive, cool like kung fu action moves, and you really have to kind of bend the rule system around. You know, how do you balance that without making it something you can do every single
Yeah.
time, right? That's the tricky. But I felt like that worked out. You know, that move worked out. I felt like it was a good compromise, and it kind of came back later like. Well, you should get an AOO probably for climbing up on this step, but you know I'm going to give you payback and cool points for that.
But it did like it left me completely exposed as I expected. Like there were consequences to it. It wasn't like I did it and now I'm fine and on top. I was like I was hanging, so like I couldn't do a double attack. And then when I actually pulled myself up, I was surrounded by 2 enemies now, and no one could help me.
Yeah, and that was I thought that was a worthy or satisfying reveal, which is, oh, you hear this kind of weird clickety voice talking to you, and the spider comes down from the ceiling, and then you realize that's not the guy who was talking to us.
Yeah, because you very specifically said the voice was from below, but when like the spider showed up, it was above us, and I didn't think, I was like, oh, I must have like, I don't know, climbed up or something, and we didn't see it. I was like, oh no, there was, yeah, I should have noticed.
Yeah, now you're in the trash compactor, right? I thought overall it was a pretty good fight. I liked the environment. I wish there was maybe like a little extra flourish on top of it somehow. Of maybe you could manipulate if you were the key holder, maybe you could manipulate the staircase somehow. Maybe create platforms that or something, or maybe move it up or down. Have some sort of control over it that you eventually had, but. Honestly, I think the thing that I really wish in hindsight I had been able to do is actually build a little prop that would have been just maybe like 3 floors worth of this spiral staircase, so that when, Avril's above and you're down below and the rest of the party's over here, we would have had a better spatial idea of what that was rather than just drawing on the battle map.
Yeah.
So I don't think that really. I think that would have helped that encounter tremendously, is to actually have a physical prop. I'm not, we could have played it theater of the mind. I think in that particular fight, especially when you're working in 3 dimensions, those fights get tricky in theater of the mind.
Yeah,
right?
I can imagine, especially like if you added the element of like we were like had control of the console, so we're like moving cells as like steps and stuff like that.
Yeah. And we had, the thing is, we had just had a dungeon like that where the little pieces moved around and things like that. And I felt like it was too much of a repeat of the big finale that we just had, so I didn't want to do that. So I was a little bit trapped there, but especially when you have 4 people at the table who all have a different idea of where they are on this spiral staircase, which really doesn't have any definitive marker. I think you have to do a drawing or a map for sure. And if you want to take it to the next level, you do the 3D piece.
And I've noticed that, like, because in the first few sessions of Greyhaven were completely theater of the mind, and then the second 2 sessions were, I mean, we didn't have pieces on the board, but I at least drew out a map to say you guys are in this area or whatever. But it was harder in the first few sessions of knowing where everything was. And
yeah. It does definitely like help get everybody on the same page and kind of get a unified vision of what's going on, even if it's just a quick thumbnail sketch of what it actually is. So, yeah. So I thought, there was some potential for interesting discoveries in the dungeon. I don't know if it like paid off as much as maybe I wanted it to. Finding that Warwind had been imprisoned in there at one point was interesting, but you didn't learn a lot more about what was going on there. And part of that was, I think, honestly, like, I probably could have trimmed the hit points off of those monsters, although you dispatched that last guy very quickly
Yeah.
because of all the radiant damage, but I could have probably trimmed the spider a little bit and shortened that fight by 15 minutes. It would have had a little more time. Because I knew I wanted to get to this thing with Santahar, and so you discovered this stuff with Warwind, and before you could ask anybody about it, it was like, let's go, Beaudry is there, and he's like, you got to come with me.
Yeah.
Which was a fine...
And I think of all of us, Vanna's character, Avril's the one who has like the most motivation to figure out what Warwind was, and I think she took her time to try and figure some of that stuff out. But like you said, we didn't have a lot of time left and you had other stuff that we needed to get to. But yeah, I don't know that my character would be incredibly interested in why, like just a passing interest in why Warwind was imprisoned in this place, but not as much as Havana seems to be.
Yeah, I mean, her character is for whatever reason, I don't know if it's just because she's been given these quests to find this stuff. She's more, her character's more tied to that NPC than anyone else. Although he keeps cropping up.
Yeah, he's definitely important to what's going on.
Yeah, that radiant damage last night that Dawnraiser did was that was brutal. That was like, he was like, oh, I do 15 points of damage. No, I don't think so. Yeah, that moonbeam was pretty rude too. So that brings us around to our next topic here. Everyone hates Santahar, which I don't know. You tell me what you thought of getting summoned by him and how that negotiation went down. I know we did a little debrief after the cameras went off and talked about what Santahar is driving at and what he's getting at, but I'd like to hear your impression before I spout forth, my kind of design ideas and whatnot.
I think I like the encounters with Santahar because it's this. I mean, he's an unknown to us, really. Like, we don't fully know if we could take him in a fight if we needed to. Like, and even if we tried to fight him, if he definitely wouldn't fight fair. And he's old enough that he's planned for a fight with us or adventurers of our ilk for hundreds of years. So it's like this weird like we're not afraid of him, but we know that fighting him's not the right idea at the moment.
Yeah. It's difficult because I think that situation, by virtue of the way it's put together, does make the characters feel a little helpless and impotent, right? It's like you could tell that Garav was like, okay, yeah, let's go see him. I'm ready to take this guy on.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, are you?
He doesn't play fair. He's like, hell, remember that potion? Yeah, you can't save your dad now.
Yeah, and I don't know whether the adventurers fear him. It's funny because he hasn't done anything to demonstrate his power directly.
Yeah.
Right? Like, he hasn't paralyzed anyone or anything like that. He has just done what I consider sort of like DM dick moves.
Yeah.
Of like, oh, well, that potion that you ordered is laid up.
It's kind of like, he's kind of like, what's his name? Wilson Fisk from the Marvel Universe, Kingpin. Because it's like, Kingpin is so smart and so good at being a criminal. But then also when anyone goes to fight him, they're like, oh, he's also an incredibly powerful, great fighter. Like, I didn't expect that either.
Right.
He doesn't have to fight, but he can if he needs to.
Yeah. And I don't know, I haven't made a lot of decisions about what Santahar, what his contingencies are if you were to attack him, but it's just one of those situations where I feel like that NPC possesses a lot of what I would call DM fiat, where it's just like, oh yeah, he just has that. He's the most powerful and wealthiest crime lord in Waterdeep. He should be able to do things that are off the charts in terms of, oh yeah, of course he lives in this subterranean tower that has an entire mechanical representation of.
And he can always send Baudry to find us no matter where we are, and
I honestly had to roll last night to see was Gingy going to be dead or not. When you asked about that, I was like, he probably straight up murdered him, but that feels like it's stealing a plot point away from the party, and I felt like I was already inflicting enough kind of DM plot pressure on the party that I was like, I can't have him just like Xanathar. I could show Xanathar's power by having him horribly dead and dismembered, but it almost like it opens up a much more interesting storyline to dump him in this leather bag and he's beaten and shaved and all this kind of stuff. And now, I got the vibe anyhow that it was like it's almost like, well, we have to kind of like nurse Gingy back to health.
I mean, I think Grayson was already going down that path, but I know like Thawne was very much like, because when the last time we saw him, Thawne was like, I'm gonna straight up kill this dude, and like Grayson's like, no, I can redeem him. Like nobody is past redeeming, and Thawne was like, no, I attack him, and then he was the only one who got like dazed by his weird eye creature stuff. He just ran at him and just fell unconscious.
Yeah.
But it's interesting now because Garav's the one who initiated the whole because you gave him the vision from the future or past or whatever where Gingy is being tortured. And he was the one who asked about Gingy, and he's the one who wanted Gingy, and seems like now Thawne feels bad for what he's done. Like I don't know if that's just his natural feeling bad, or maybe now that he's not as corrupted by Black Razor.
Right. Yeah. Well, and now that maybe there's some daylight at the end of, if I get this potion and I feed it to my dad, that'll fix the situation. I mean, that's an arguable point, but it certainly is a step toward progress, whatever that ends up being, right? But I think there's some talk in the chat that the party doesn't really respect Xanathar. I don't know that. I think it's one of those, like, you tell me what your angle is on it, and then I'll.
I think with Xanathar, it's just he's an unknown. We don't know, like, because we went up against Gingy, very like not fully. Like when we first met him, he poisoned us, so we didn't get to fight him. And the second time, we ran at him, and he almost immediately like knocked Garav down with his Fey powers. So like we're always like, Gingy's kind of he wouldn't be an easy thing to take down. And the idea that Xanathar just caught him and tortured him to near death is like, okay, well then we don't understand how like he's just this weird like unknown. We don't know what he's capable of. And even if we killed him, like what if it's like he's got some contingency plan on my death, like the entire city falls into a rift and like everyone dies in Waterdeep. Like,
oh, yeah, tell me more about these contingency plans. I feel like, well, honestly, what's happened is that one sort of like omnipotent DM NPC has been replaced by another one, right? And so now you see that like, oh, this guy's now playing like he can puppet master this dude because, or let's put it this way, the guy who had a lot of power now has been replaced. Now that you have more power, is replaced by a guy who's got a lot more power instead, right? And some of I think what's going on is, I think there's a natural inclination on the player's part of any game, not just this table, but of any game of D&D, for the players to think, well, we can take whatever you can dish out, right? And so then when you present the players with an opponent who clearly doesn't really have stats and doesn't have an obvious method of being defeated, then they get kind of belligerent about it. Like they get kind of like okay, well, all right, well, there's a resistance to that because now they feel like they sort of feel trapped by the circumstances. Like I don't have any agency over how to influence this. Like what should I do? And it's like, well, I don't know. I suppose you could go and find out who his allies are and turn them, or find out who his enemies are and unite them, or whatever it is. Like you'd have to do things that are not straightforward Dungeons and Dragons kind of, which is bash open the door, kill this guy, or get the magic MacGuffin that then turns him into a frog or whatever.
And it's not. I don't think it's exactly that we as players don't feel we have agency, but our characters don't have agency over the situation, which is different. And it's definitely like, I mean, Xanathar is our current quest giver, is what it is, and it's of the quest givers you could throw at us, it's more interesting than like, well, your guild hall shows up and they're like, hey, there's this thing, go do that, get this MacGuffin. But like the idea of like, it's a much more interesting story to have like, well, this crime boss is holding a lot of shit over your head and you gotta do it.
Vanna was really like, after the session, she was like, God, like, I don't like this guy. And I'm like, yeah, you're not supposed to, really, right? But she was like, I wanted to deceive him. I wanted to steal a copy of this map and then give him a fake and get away with it. And I'm like, okay, but there's a different discussion about that we'll have in a minute. But I said, now you have the opportunity to go and do this quest for him and then potentially screw him over way worse than giving him a fake copy of the map, right? Like, he'll find a way to get another copy of the map somehow, eventually, right? And I don't know whether it's going to do you any good in the short term, or if he finds out that you've got it and then it starts tracking you down, that's even worse. But now, if he's the quest giver and you accept his quest, now you really have a chance to, like, screw him over. Now, he's probably planning for that somehow.
Yeah.
But think of the con that you get to pull, which is way bigger and way more consequential of potentially denying him, some sort of immortality than just like, oh, we stole a map and now we've got the real copy and you got suckered into using a fake, right?
Yeah.
3 months later, that catches up with you.
Yeah.
So I think he's going to be an interesting quest giver, and some of this stuff didn't even occur to me until I started talking about it last night after the stream, which is like, Santahar can't send any of his lackeys, his known
Yeah, that was a
goons,
fun talk after.
out to the site of the barrier peaks on this quest for immortality, because if he does, then the Lords of Waterdeep and the Harper's Guild and all the people who are against him are all going to be like, whoa, what's going on out here? And send in the helicopters and start dropping napalm on the place, right? But if they send up the heroes who just rescued the entire city of Waterdeep from this weird devil worshipping cult, like, those guys are going to go out there and be like, Harper's like, yeah, go for it. Enjoy.
You're take a vacation to a weird place, everyone dies? Yeah, you've earned it.
Yeah. So, so that's an interesting kind of twist for me. I like these kind of morally complicated things of, like, we hate the guy that we're working for, but we're going to take advantage of like all of his resources that he has.
Yeah, that's certainly for my character, it's a hard choice of like working with Santahar is not something a Paladin of Torm would do, but it's like, I don't have a lot of choice. Like, I was questioning, like, even if, like, he was like, I'll give you, whatever, like, what do you want for this? Like, what's your price? I was like,
right.
He is expecting a price, but it's like, if I take something, like, truly, like, awesome, is that gonna affect, like, is that gonna inherently corrupt me or put me in the debt of this man? Like, it challenges my character's, like, moral point of view, which is always great to deal with.
Yeah. I don't know that he's necessarily stupid either, in terms of, like, he's going to give you all this stuff right up front and then just set you loose in the world, right? So if you ask for something super powerful, it'd be like, how about I give you, this set of gear, and then you can have that on delivery.
Yeah,
right?
and that's why I don't think he's going to be like, I want this. He'll probably ask for something simple.
Shimmickson asks, did you think about having a show of power from Santahar? Well, so a big part of it was because by the time we got into the negotiation, we only had like 45 minutes left, right? I didn't want to do anything that risked breaking into a combat, right?
Yeah.
I didn't want... Also, I just don't think Santahar needs to work in brute force that way. He's got Beaudry with him. There was demonstration that he had tortured Gingy in particularly awful ways.
Yeah, we know that he has access to very powerful men. Because Beaudry has just a seemingly unlimited supplies of teleport flasks, and he's got a magical ring finger that brings him back from death whenever he's died, which has been apparently dozens of times. So he's clearly a man with a lot of resources.
Yeah. So I feel like Santahar doesn't, like, his it's much easier for him to operate on the level of threats, and whether he has to make good on those threats or not is pretty choice, right? Like that's his true power, is that he can say stuff that makes people question whether he can do it or not, but be afraid to find out the answer, and therefore they follow, his instructions. So I think that's kind of the power play for Xanathar. I think if you use okay, he disintegrates part of the wall and carves your name into the floor or whatever, that honestly brings him down to a level of okay, he has these abilities and these statistics, and if it has hit points, we can kill it. And I don't want players to shift into that mode of thinking yet.
Yeah, bringing up Wilson Fisk, in the first season of Daredevil, he's very calculating, and you fear him because nobody wants to say his name, and he's played very straight. But then when he does lose his shit at the end, you're so terrified because you're I've not seen him ever just not care anymore, and you're oh my god, what is this kid this is insane.
Yeah. So, the other thing that I wanted to bring up, though, and I wish, in terms of setting up the game, and I'll just kind of lift the veil a little bit here, is I wish that I had put a little more thought into making the adventure hooks that are leading into the next phase of the adventure a little more personal, right? So clearly there's something there for Ava in terms of maybe, I don't know, clearly there's something there for Thawne in terms of you get this thing to help your dad and whatever. But instead of Xanathar offering them very personal and specific things that they could each follow up on or learn or discover, whatever it was, it became this situation where Xanathar is well, you tell me what you want and I'll try and make it happen. And when you put the players in that position, it gets to be kind of uncomfortable, or they get a little bit lost at sea because they don't know what the boundaries are, right? So we've established that this guy is this immensely powerful, immensely rich character who can seemingly kind of draw on an infinite well of resources. Is it too much for you to ask for an artifact or whatever? What sort of stuff can I get? On the other hand, I could see Xanathar being oh, well, do you want, do you want, one of the fingers from the hand of Vecna? Because I can get that for you. And be no. I could see those offerings all being tainted a little bit.
Yeah.
But yeah. I'm not big on Waterdeep canon, so the goldfish has been neglected on my part, which I guess maybe is a failing, but maybe.
You mentioned him the first time we saw Xanathar that he was there, so.
Yeah. So I don't know. My portrayal of Xanathar definitely got twisted by the fact that I had to bring him into this stage misdirection storyline. And that meant that rather than maybe just being this creepy crime boss who has this pet goldfish that he cares about, and then he just cares about murdering and extorting people, instead it turned into oh, I'm a patron of the arts and I'm a student of human psychology and the broad sweeping drama of human emotion. And that changed kind of his fundamental character a little bit, right? He actually has in a very weird way, he has a surprising amount of empathy, or at least an attempt at comprehension on moral existence.
And I like that, because that's given Grayson something to play off of, trying to be well, if you really want to understand human emotions, maybe be nice, and but again,
you gave a great speech last night of oh, what would you do with a second life? I thought that was terrific. I don't think he was prepared to respond to that in the moment, but I definitely could see something like that as oh, maybe there is a crack in the armor there. It was a great, a great kind of, little knife's edge into the armor there.
But I just remember this, when you were talking about trying to give us personal reasons why we would go there. When Xanathar mentioned that this God's Fire can rebirth people, or has this sort of reincarnation magic, it just kind of popped in my head very briefly. But the idea of making Grayson a fully blooded human is just not something he would ever speak about or actively seek out, but that's something that he definitely would love to not be a doppelganger, and like the idea that he could go to a place and he would never like the paladin within him would never like seek that out or do that in like in a way that like prevented someone else from using it or something like that. But like that's something that piqued his interest.
Yeah, that's that's the selfish secret that he wouldn't allow himself to share with somebody else, right? Yeah, that's really interesting. And I was trying to look for. That was the tricky part for me. Is like, okay, well, what would Santahar want from this place? Like. Do you know anything about Expedition to the Barrier Peaks or not?
No.
Okay, well then I won't bother talking about it. But let's just assume that it's a place filled with all kinds of different magic and whatnot, right? Like, if you're Santahar, what magic item would you want? Like the only thing I could come up with was like, okay, he doesn't care about like stuff that does physical damage, or maybe he cares about stuff that does mind control. Like that would make his job.
But he
easier.
Probably has some of that.
But you're right. He probably has some of that. But then on top of it, I was like, well, immortality, right? But like true immortality, not like becoming a lich and getting your spirit corrupted and being, having a phylactery that can be flown and all this stuff. Like if you could transfer your essence or rebuild your body into a fresh, younger version, that to me, what's interesting about that is it takes this superhuman, larger than life, DM NPC and then brings him down to like, I have a human problem.
Yeah, and it worked out because it's like when you said like what he wants is he's like, I'm getting old and I'm not ready to die yet. Like it's a very relatable thing.
Yeah. Groovy Lolly asks, how do you feel your GM style varies between others? I mean, I can't necessarily speak for a ton of other GMs, but I do tend to be a very improvisational GM, like reactive to what's happening at the table and trying to see if I can find a way to do a callback to something that's been established or reintegrate or retwist or see if I can see where something's going or pick up an idea that's happened at the table and then put that into the game in a new and interesting way that the players then can respond to, and then we generate more material that I can reintegrate. And I'm not a big like let's plan 7 sessions out and let's read the whole module end to end. Like I read it end to end to get an idea of where it's supposed to go, and then I kind of if you want to look at it in terms of like writing, there are DMs who like to do an outline of their entire novel or their campaign, and there are DMs like me who are like called pantsers, right? It's like seat of the pants. Like even yesterday, I was a little frustrated with myself because I'm like, I don't feel like this is tight enough. Like I need to, and I felt like at the end of the night, I was like, we had a big 1.5 hour long fight, and I wish I had trimmed that down so that we could have had more time to really lay the foundation and lay the roots of getting into the adventure, right?
I feel pretty similar because I come from a very strong improv background and do a lot of improv, and that's what I found I enjoy the most about GMing. Is that's why I like playing like the one-off like rules lights game, because those are perfect for that. Like this guy said this, so that I'm gonna bring that back in a big way and like stuff like that. And I try and bring that into I tried to bring that into Greyhaven. It's just for a 4-part adventure, it's not easy.
It's tricky, right?
Yeah.
There's one last question here, I think. Does Grayson have difficulties controlling some normal doppelganger natural abilities, like being able to read minds as a fundamental aspect of a doppelganger physiology, allowing them to mimic people better? Does Grayson turn that off or fight against that nature?
I haven't thought too much about that because I don't know if that's part of the 5e doppelganger. There's a very short write-up in the monster manual, I think, about doppelgangers in there, and I don't remember it added that, but I think he would definitely suppress that. Like anything that is inhuman, he would suppress. And he's thankfully, as we've established, his parents are both doppelgangers, and he would have basically been training his entire life to not be a doppelganger and like to hold himself to that. And I kind of thought of the idea like sometimes his parents like they can't even they grew up switching willy-nilly, and now they don't switch, but occasionally they'll switch between each other, which Grayson doesn't think he considers that cheating. But yeah, like occasionally his mom will switch with his dad, and he can tell the difference because he's a doppelganger. But because they still need like that fix, like that's their cheat day, I guess. But he's very much trained his entire life to not do that, and obviously his training with the Paladins of Torm have helped him to like control his emotions and stuff like that. So if like
it isn't a stat block, as
okay.
Wraith points out. Read thoughts is something you should be able to do.
Yeah, should be able to, but he wouldn't do it.
Yeah. I mean, it's in a lot of ways, it's almost like a combination of like a Pinocchio story and then one of those like superhero stories where it's like I'm just trying to be like a Spider-Man. I'm just trying to be a normal boy at high school, and like I just want to go to my freaking prom, and I don't want to have to, I don't want to stick out.
Yeah.
So we don't have to wrap up right at 3, but I don't want to abuse your time or your driving time either, since you did drive all the way out to my place. So let's talk a little bit about Lords of Greyhaven, and since you brought it up and it's on the agenda here, how you felt like your prep and what you put on the table evolved over the 4 sessions, and how you felt kind of like we actually you came in and checked in on the first one, and then we had all these ideas that we kind of like bobbled up, and then how did you feel like after having gone through that, how it sort of played out over the last 2 or 3 sessions?
It played out a lot. I think it played out pretty well. I think session 2 played out pretty well because this whole idea of like introducing like this character who was like, hey, how did we get off the island? And they were like, oh, I think a boat? I don't know, we didn't ask. And like playing that out and stuff. And that I think that worked out pretty well. And the interesting thing was like the unexpected choices. Like the third session was probably my favorite to run because I was like trying to figure out, I was very last minute trying to figure out what I was going to do, and then I was like, oh, you know what, we haven't done any puzzles. What if I do a dungeon of just puzzles? I wish I'd done a few more. It was shorter than I expected because I didn't want them to be too hard. But it worked out pretty well because even Sam had said that they normally don't like puzzle dungeons, but they enjoyed this one a lot. So I was happy about that. But yeah, like they did the whole puzzle dungeon,
and that's where they found the kid who was like the maker kid or whatever.
And that was the biggest thing that I regret is because like I didn't have a voice, and I just decided like, well, what if this guy is like kind of a tinkerer and makes toys, and he's like somewhat childish. And the second I started doing even like just talking slightly childish, I was like prepared for like a fight. I had all this stuff set up for a fight, and they were like, oh, well, we can't kill it. It's a kid. And I was like, oh, god damn it. It's like, let's befriend it and bring it with us. Yeah. It's like, okay, great, yeah.
And I remember, like, I watched the VOD, and it was like, it turned into this huge thing of, you got into a fight, and everybody at the table was like, why isn't his gargantuan steampunk war machine just slaughtering these guys? And you were like, he doesn't feel like it right now.
Yeah.
He'll decide when he's in danger. Yeah. I mean, that's like a totally natural like GM moment. Like I was right there with you, brother, where I was like, yeah, no, well, okay. Yeah.
I was like, one of these days I gotta kill one of these lords, right? I gotta do it.
But as Wraith points out, like that those can lead to moments of discovery, right? Like now I have to do something with that character.
Yeah.
And I think especially for streamed games, it provides an opportunity for character development because there's role playing going on, and the players are kind of like, well, how can we be friends with this guy so that we can get the gigantic steampunk thing on our side? As opposed to if it turns into a fight, it's sort of like there's this combat which may or may not be interesting, and then it comes to a close, and sort of all that is over. Right?
Yeah.
Before BSB Care goes, he had a question, and I'm curious about your thoughts on it, whether it matters or not. But do you have any thoughts regarding bumps and inspiration being put into tiers instead of like you can buy bumps and inspiration and flashbacks and stuff like that, and it contributes to a tier? Do you have a feeling about how that went last night? I obviously like. It's something new for the audience to get used to, and I think there's probably still room to tinker with it, but I want to get your feedback before I talk about it.
I don't have any issue with it being tiers. It seemed like just like we didn't unlock as many tiers as we normally went. My only concern, which isn't a super huge concern, is that we've tied now our one cool things, which we don't really use at all anymore, to 10 bumps. So then it's like, so we have to hit a certain tier before we get
that. That would be a tier. I would turn
Yeah.
that into just
Yeah,
go straight up a tier.
I figured that would happen if we were
Yeah.
switching the tier mount. So I don't have any huge issue with it because sometimes we'll get so many bumps and then it'll be a complete role play session and then we won't really get a lot of chance to use them.
Right.
So it's interesting. I don't have any huge issue with it being that way. It's just a different thing. Like I did that with Greyhaven. I was originally going to do how we do it in Ironkeep, where it's like they get a thing, but that also unlocks tiers. And then Jordan talked me into doing like the whole just straight tiers, which was it. I mean, it's just a different way of doing it.
Yeah, I think it simplifies and streamlines things. The tricky part for me is if you have something that chat can tip for, then they will tip for it, right?
Yeah.
So if you say, all right, every $10 is a bump that the table gets, but then on top of it you have a tier where it's like, okay, at $50 this thing happens, at $100 this thing happens, at $150 whatever. Then you have to account for, okay, well at $150 we've got probably 10 or 11 bumps floating around on the table if the players haven't used them. Potentially per character, and then on top of it you have either a reroll or inspiration or whatever, and it starts to make the game mechanics kind of wonky. But the other tricky part of it is now I have to come up with something that's worth kind of pushing to the $50 tier, the $100. Like now then I have to chum a bunch of sort of like plot altering stuff out there. Whereas here I can have a little more fine control if I make it all tiers, where it's like I could make a tier that at $20 the table gets inspiration, and then at $21 everybody gets a bump. So a bump all of a sudden just becomes worth $1 at that point, right? So I think I might work with a little bit more variation of like, okay, I wanted it to be kind of like average out to be about the same, so that whatever your bumps were still worth about $10, and sometimes it's a little cheaper and sometimes it's a little better, but I don't know. It's a little bit tricky, right?
Because I talked a lot with Jordan Caves-Callerman about this before Greyhaven, about like I was like I feel this, but I don't know, maybe your numbers are different, like you would know better. And he was like, none of us really know, we're all just kind of making it up, figuring it out at this point, if it's better to do one way or the other, or like what's the best way to stimulate your audience. So we're just trying to figure it out.
Yeah. So we'll keep, we'll kind of keep an eye on. We always keep an eye on it. It was a new year. It was a new way to kind of. I go back and forth between like, oh, I want people to be able to do an individual, like buy an individual unit of something. Like I think that's cool, but like we also don't want to make it so complicated that whoever's running the board and monitoring chat has to go, okay, so these two people get bumps, this person gets a flashback, these guys get inspiration, and then we've capped out inspiration right now. There's a hold on that. Nobody else can buy that. Like, and then it becomes kind of an auctioneering kind of.
We've each got a pile of different things in front of us, and we're like, what do we? Oh crap! I haven't used any of this. And
yeah. And on the flip side, like, But I do like giving people the feeling that they're buying something tangible, and so that's where I struggle with a tiered situation. But what I wanted to do was like, rather than it always being this like kind of like trudge to every $25 or every $50 or whatever it was, I want to include kind of a little bit of a weird, like I was talking about, where it's like, okay, we hit this $25 milestone, but then for $2 more, this thing kicks in or whatever. Yeah. And I think I'll be tweaking it, more as we go forward. So I understand kind of. It's one of those fine-tuning things that always like, how do you juggle it? Like towards the end of the session, nobody donates for bumps because it's towards the end of the session and they're never going to get used, right? Whereas if we make story awards kind of more towards the top of the tier, then you still have a reason to sort of to donate towards those tiers. So it's like it's balancing that kind of dance between, number one, like how do people feel like their contributions are getting utilized at the table, And then number two, like where do they come in the arc of this session, right?
Yeah.
You know.
It's I remember in Greyhaven I had one donation that is basically the main thing that when I thought of the campaign, because it was based on a novel, that the idea that at some point the characters would all literally just swap bodies, so they would have to exchange character sheets and play as the other people.
Yeah.
It's still like their personality, but now in the body of someone else. And I was like, I'll make this like this donation this, and then we just never hit that.
Yeah.
So it just never came up, and I was like, oh, that would have been so much fun.
I mean, that's the tough part, right? Is like on the one hand, you want to build those things in there. There's room for surprise and something cool that could happen for the players and for the audience. But on the other hand, you don't want to make it like such a gimme that it has to happen or build your session around it either, right? So it's interesting. Yeah, we have some. I had an idea too that maybe there would be some sort of like a bump bank. Let's put it that way, where like at the end of the session, everybody at the table would just tally up their bumps and go, okay, well we have 7 bumps left over, and that would go into the bump bank. But not that you could draw those things out, but that they would start working towards their own goal, right? Yeah. So their own donation would be like their own thing. Like, okay, well, when the bank gets 50 bumps in it, these healing potions are unlocked for everybody, or something like that, right? Something like that. So it's a tough thing. What was the other thing I was gonna say along those lines? Something else that occurred to me was maybe, I don't want to get this too complicated, but maybe we do a thing where each unique person who contributes builds up some sort of meter, right? So it's not necessarily, what I wanted to do is I wanted to try and make a way so that if you put in $2, you felt like you were contributing to the cause as much as somebody who puts in more than that. Right?
Yeah.
So I don't know. We could have a long discussion about it. I don't think we ever will ever get to a situation where everybody's happy about the way that it works. I mean, I remember in the old days of bar keys that somebody brought up where it was like, okay, we're gonna send in 3 more bad guys to make it a tougher fight for the party. Now we're gonna give this person 2 more rerolls, and we're gonna give this person 5 more hit points when they're just on the brink of death. And it made the game so swingy that it really got like. It got tough to wrap up a fight.
Yeah.
Because the fight would get a lot tougher at the outset, and then you get pummeled on. So there would be bumps, or not necessarily bumps, but there would be rerolls and things like that coming in, and then eventually the party would sort of like get squeezed down so hard that they would buy a bunch of hero NPCs to come in and help rescue them, and it made the vagaries of the game a little too dependent upon the mood of chat, right? If chat wanted to punish the party or punish a particular PC, like Sean Graham was great at playing the heel, but like so many awful things. Like by the end of that campaign, he was more machine than man.
Yeah, and it does like. That's why I'm so happy that we don't really do re-rolls except for like resubs and whatnot, because it isn't like in a lot of the older games like Marquis where it's like, hey, roll, that didn't work, re-roll, 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 re-roll. Okay, that's the one I want.
Yeah, and that was the other part too, is like you just slow the narrative down to where you're like, oh. All right, so if you were to go back and just to get us back on track here a little bit, if you were to go back to Lords of Greyhaven and rerun that scenario as another mini campaign, as another 4-session, whatever it would be, type of scenario, what would you change, or what would you what did you learn from running it that you were like, oh, okay, well that didn't work the way I wanted, or I was happy with what happened here, and I would make this scenario focused more around that thing.
I feel like it's hard for like 4 sessions and doing it the way I did. It's sort of somewhat sandboxy. I feel like I would try and have a stronger idea of what I wanted from the island itself, because I think the island wasn't much of a character, and I later towards the end tried to just add weird elements to it that were
like with the graves and
the graves I thought was just like a thought I had randomly, and then like one thing I I enjoy doing, which I only started to do towards the end, was I just go through Pinterest and I just like scroll through fantasy images until I get ideas for things, until it sparks ideas. And like there was like one, I think in session 3, where they just came across like it was just a rock giant against a mountain that was dead, and it's like the battle wound was just like a just whatever
Like a waterfall.
Waterfall.
Yeah.
And I just saw that image and I was like, what a cool thing to have like on this weird island. And I would have loved to have like weirder things on the island and also make the island more threatening, because they never ran into, for a prison island, they didn't run into really any prisoners very much. They had like those 3, like the brother, sister, and their half ogre friend that they ran into twice, but they never came back. Like there wasn't, that fight never came back because I made that a tier in the last session. But yeah, just like more like threat from the like what a prison island is or something, like just some sense of this actually being a prison, because it just seemed like it was just an island that people couldn't leave.
Yeah, although I think that's a prison of sorts, right? Like obviously,
but like
I think maybe one way to express that is that everybody that they encounter is like, oh, I would rather be back in my hometown playing piano at my local tavern than stuck here where I don't have
just having like, because the first lord they fought, the guy who was secretly an Oni, I was like literally just looking through trailers, and there was some crappy prison island movie starring Ray Liotta, and I just watched the trailer and I got the idea of like, oh, there's like a society and there's like a cult or something in there, but we didn't explore any of that. Like there's just a lot of missed opportunities, I think, to explore what kind of societies would pop up on an island like this.
I think that's tricky though, right?
Yeah, and it's hard for like a 4-session thing.
Yeah, and recently, as in like today or yesterday, Matt Colville apparently posted a video where he was like, nobody cares about your world building.
Yeah,
like, your players don't.
It's not so much like I wish my ideas were better, but just like have a cool playground that they could have explored, which I think I eventually found, but I didn't really plan out as much in the beginning.
I think those things are those are hard to get the players hooked on, right?
Yeah.
There's certainly, you can present things, but they got to be presented very strongly up front. But then how do you make it like my issue with, or I think the challenge in running a prison type scenario is, how do you make it feel dangerous without making it feel stiflingly oppressive?
Yeah.
If it's nighttime and anyone who steps foot outside gets eaten in the mists by the ravenous packs of beasts, I don't know how do I attack that?
Yeah.
I remember my buddy ran a campaign, this was years ago, and the basic idea was there was like, when night fell, these mists would roll in and you would get devoured by the stuff that lived in the fog, right? And so the only thing that you could do was like during the day, the mists would lift and you'd go out and you'd go hunting, or you'd go halfway as far as you wanted to go, and then you would make sure that you turned around and get back, because if you got stuck outside after night. And it was a compelling premise, like certainly a cerebral, intellectual premise from the DM's point of view. It's like, oh, okay, this is really, raises the stakes and adds a lot of tension. But from a player's point of view, you're kind of like, then I just don't want to go outside again, ever, right? So that's tricky, right?
I think for Greyhaven, I accomplished what I most wanted to accomplish, which was like, because I've never run a campaign like that. Like I see it in my Pants campaign and had to actually take it seriously. And then, like, because most of what I've run recently has all been just like Goblin Quest or like Rules Light one-offs and stuff like that. And I've never run a campaign that's completely from my own brain for any length of time beyond like a session. So that was the most of just like, see how this works. Like, and it was kind of like a play test for all of us.
And did you feel like you had too many ideas that you didn't get them all in, or you didn't have enough developed ideas that you wish you had painted them stronger, or did you discover too many ideas? I mean, I don't know. I guess like To me, whenever I'm a tinkerer, right? That's when I run stuff. Like I can't help but screw around with it and go like, what if this happened?
Yeah.
Somebody says something at the table and that sparks something, or somebody says something in chat and that sparks something. Like what was your struggle in terms of? I think the DM's job or the DM always struggles with how do I manage the cool ideas that I have, and how do I discard what's not working or not interesting at the moment, and how do I embrace the cool things that come up?
I think I did a fairly good job because I before the series started, I was worried about like all that. I was like, it's 4 sessions. How much should I plan? And then I was like just reading up on things, and someone's like, don't write 4 sessions, write the first session. Yeah. So I was like, okay, I'll just have kind of a vague idea of what might happen, but just focus on the first session and then focus on the next session. And because I was working at the time so much, I was like, I didn't have a lot of time to plan, so I was usually wrapping up planning on Monday and sometimes even Tuesday. Was when I was like before I left work, like just at work when I had a moment, was planning the session. So I think just because I didn't have as much prep time as I would have liked, it helped to condense it down. The only things that I missed out on was I wanted to like introduce more reason for the characters to like be into it. I got a little bit of their like demon-y stuff in there a little bit, and I wanted to do some more like underground stuff for Kelsey's dwarf, which never really played out. And I had this idea on session 2, and I was trying to introduce it I didn't find a place to introduce it then, but I tried a little bit in the last session. But the idea that Ash, the character, the tiefling that they met, was actually on the job that killed Kelly's character's father. I was trying to like push that in, right. But she kind of missed that because I brought up that like Ash is also from the town that Kelly's from, but I guess I think she just picked a random town and didn't think about it.
Yeah, and that was the tricky part too, especially when like that came up session 4, right? Yeah. And so it's like you're literally kind of like 4 or 5 weeks away from when they thought of their backstory. Yeah. And they're already like kind of like focusing on what's in front of them as opposed to like that stuff sort of gets shelved, right? Yeah. I always say like you're lucky if players can remember anything that happened more than 3 sessions back, right?
And sometimes you get fun surprises like in session 4 they were fighting whites. And I just, after they killed them, I was like, oh yeah, they're just like, they look like gladiators. And I didn't really, like Sam's backstory is that their character was a gladiator beforehand. So like that affected them. It's like, oh, I just said gladiators and made a connection without thinking about it.
Right. Yeah, those are happy accidents. I did have one question for you that I wanted to kind of dive into that I think has broader applicability to everybody, which was, Kelsey got sick at the last minute for the last session. Yeah. How did you feel about, like, this is something that we all have to face. In fact, next week, Megan is not going to be available to play in Iron Keep, so I'm facing this same decision of, like, how do you handle that PC who you know is just going to miss, like, 1 session, and then, I mean, in their case, they're not going to come back, but it's like, give me your thought process, because you decided to sort of like ghost NPC her.
Yeah, because the choice behind that is because I mean I've played in enough campaigns where we've done. I mean in Iron Keep we do that all the time where someone's gone and we introduce somebody else in a fun way. But I've played in like other games where like someone's gone. Well, someone can play their character because we don't want to figure out a way to like maneuver them. And I made the choice to have Kelsey's character there because it was the last session. If it had been session 2 or 3, then I would have been like, fine, she like gets food poisoning and can't be with you. But because this was them getting off the island, it wouldn't make sense that her character wasn't there. So I was like, I mean, one of you guys can play it, or I will kind of play it, but just you tell me what you want to do and I'll roll for it.
Yeah, I'm in sort of an easy out with Megan's character in that she's semi-divine being, right? Yeah. So some weird divine magic can happen to her, and then she can suddenly reappear or whatever. So like that seems convenient for me. Although the other side of that is I have to figure out a way to get an NPC or to get a PC in for that 1 session and then get them out of the 1 shot, right? Yeah. So
I was watching I watched this video on YouTube yesterday about this guy talking about Adventurers League and how it's different from like playing in a home game. He's like, but I showed up, and I was like, you mean we don't have to spend an hour and a half for you guys to find a wizard in a dungeon and choose to break him out so I can play? He's like, no, you're just there. You're there in the forest. So go. Well, doesn't matter.
You all know each other.
Yeah.
You've adventured together before.
You've always been there or whatever. It doesn't matter.
That is one of the nicer aspects of adventure. They just like hand wave the whole like we don't have to worry about. Let's not bend over backwards trying to justify something.
We actually did that. The home game I was playing with Sean Graham and a few people like Jordan Pridgeon that we played before we all joined Saving Throw when Sean was here, but we weren't yet. The thing was like all of our characters had a tattoo that we woke up one day and we had this tattoo on our body, and it allowed us to psychically talk to each other. And what it did was it basically pulled us in and out, and that was the explanation why it was, because there were like 15 people in this group, and from week to week, who knows how many people would show up and which ones. So it's just the idea of like yeah, you just are all, you have this magic tattoo, and every so often you get pulled, you just go and you get pulled into this party of people, and so it's like anytime someone new, and it's like, oh, this is a guy like you've all met him before, but like maybe he hasn't been pulled in with you in a while, but you know him.
I had this classic. I think I've mentioned this on stream before, but I've had in a couple different campaigns the party find a cursed lantern, and the lantern floats on its own, hovers, follows the party around, and then at random it emits this strobe of light and sucks one of the characters in for an indeterminate amount of time, right? And then at some point it strobes again and pops them back, right? Well, it's just on a meta level, it's just a way to explain, like, oh, that's why Eric wasn't there that way, because his character got sucked into the lantern, and then conveniently he gets popped out in the week that he does show up, right?
Yeah. I mean, so far it hasn't happened a ton, but like the ways that you've explained it have all been fairly interesting. I know with Amy, there was just a couple of like, she just like goes into her head for a bit, and it's hard. But like the last time when
you were in a dungeon and she sort of like went into a trance.
Yeah,
right?
she like a trance or whatever.
Yeah.
But like the last time when Havana like got sucked into the book for a minute, and then Jordan's character came out, that was actually really fun, and it gave me something to play, because it's like now I have to rescue my sister. And like
yeah. Well, and also like he was a paladin, you're a paladin.
Yeah.
And yet he had all these antiquated notions of like what a paladin was, and you're like, it doesn't work like that anymore. Maybe we should just have somebody come in and play. Just say, well, this is Ava. She's a teenager stuck in a semi-divine body, and she's out to purge the world of evil, and also probably rebel against mom and dad.
Well, and what was interesting, because I was talking to Megan afterwards, like, it's not that she's a teenager, it's literally every time we take a long rest, she rolls on a sheet to see what her personality is for that day. It's just, this is the second long rest we've taken.
Yeah. So she built this mechanic into her character background of she's tempestuous like the sea, and therefore, like the changing tides of the sea, whenever the day changes, her personality changes. So I don't know. I do like the idea that she's a teenager, and maybe that's also something like hand in hand to be explored along those lines, right? Certainly it was an interesting bent, and I like it because it adds a new dimension as opposed to like I'm the jokey character. I'm trying to make bad jokes. Which is fine, but like I was very curious, like how long are you gonna be able to sustain that? It's like doing a goofy character voice, like oh, you want to lock into that all night long? Okay, go for it. So that's exactly as Wraith 42 says, it's like a wild mage but for personality. So yeah, it's a very cool, very fun character concept. So I hope we'll get to see more of that.
Well, and
I think go ahead.
It's nice because like all of us have had months and months to build our characters, essentially, because we had the session 0 where we kind of zeroed in on our characters, and then have had all this time to like figure out what our characters are. And she's entering in at a very late stage, like level 5, I think, when she entered in, 6 months in, and like okay, just pick a character that's compelling, which is not always the easiest thing to do.
Yeah, I think she is in, like, as a player, she's in the toughest spot just because her character doesn't have the same strong, tight relationships with the other PCs that you guys have developed, right? And you're all from the same village, and you've been on these adventures together, and she really is. I think on the one hand, she's trying to make those connections, but on the other hand, she's also trying to honor the fact that her character is only 2 days old and is on this in this world for some other greater purpose that may not necessarily align with what you want to do. And she's not necessarily friends with you guys. She's there and kind of has to be a little naive about the world.
We're just the only people she knows at the moment.
So yeah, it's that sort of that struggle. So I think I think this next arc will bring you together on a tighter adventure, and if I sit down and put a little more work into, like, okay, what are the personal hooks for all of this? I think that will help tie her in more tightly, integrate her with the rest of the party. So that's that's my take on it. I think there's definitely some opportunity where I think something got dropped last night, like it's rumored that this is the birthplace of the gods or something like that. I think there's an opportunity to explore, like, okay, well, what is that, and what does that mean for...
Yeah, I think both Ava and Grayson.
Like, you talked about, like, oh, what if I could make a new body for Grayson? What if Ava could make a body for Basharla, right? Like, that would be a huge incentive for her to go on this adventure.
Yeah, because I don't know that Thawne or Avril are all that interested in the power of the gods, but, like, certainly Grayson and Ava are like, ooh, that's probably something we might want to look into. Yeah.
All right. So it's 3:11. I don't know if there's. We'll just throw it open for like 5 minutes or so, if that works for you. And if there's any other questions you have for Eric as a player, or we can't do too much spoilery stuff on the DM side about the game, or if you're having an issue in your own home game, we can tackle that too. So let us know if you've got something that's cooking behind the scenes in your brain that you'd like to tackle. I have to talk to Dom in terms of, like, who's going to come in and fill in the hot seat next week. I will say, like, I think we need to work out a little bit more of the top view of the table. I'd like to integrate that a little more cleanly, but I like the new layout, and I like the new streaming table for the most part. It's a little weird the way that it's arranged, like, to get the dog back there. As the DM, I'm honestly, like, I'm a little more cramped now than I was before, because before I had that whole end of the table. Yeah, you have, like, kind of that whole side.
I was thinking that when I was, like, because you don't use, like a DM screen or anything, but it's like, where do you put that DM screen, and, like,
where do you put that nobody can see it, right? Like, that's the thing, and especially because, like, where's my camera? So we're, like, right in here is where my little...
Yeah, and then Havana's just right here. That was the problem, the old studios. Like, if you angled it just right, or if I just leaned over a little bit, I could read that screen.
Yeah. That's the tough part. And that's one of the reasons I don't want too many, like, campaign bending secret things to get pumped into the unlockable tiers, is because some of the players are going to be able to see that and can't help it, right? Like,
you're just, like, looking, and it's the way it's set up on that screen. It's so that you could just look and read it very easily. That's the point.
Well, and even, like, the DM stuff is, like, my DM stuff is right here, and then you're right there. You're right there.
Unless you've got, like, a privacy screen or something.
So yeah. But what I do like about it is it's a lot. Everyone's a lot larger in the frame, and so you really get to kind of see.
Yeah, there's a lot less empty space.
And especially if there's crosstalk, like before, like if the person who's switching the cameras isn't Johnny on the spot, it would be like, Thawne and Havana would be having a conversation together. Grab and Havana, but they're on different cameras. So then it was like, well, who do we stick with?
I remember because when we were playing Betrayal at Baldur's Gate, there was a fun moment between Risky and Havana, and then, like, immediately afterwards she's like, and that's a clip or like whatever, or that's a GIF, but because of the way the camera switched, you didn't catch Risky's facial reaction.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so we had a couple things come in here for questions. Richard McSunday says, have you ever run Cursive Strahd, and do you have any tips for me running it next week? I have not run Cursive Strahd. I've played in Cursive Strahd. I guess my biggest piece of advice is I find the, spoiler alert if you've not played in the game, right? So mute this for 2 or 3 minutes. The premise is that when you get to Barovia, what's-her-face, the damsel in distress, has already been fed upon 2 times by Strahd, and you're on this rescue mission, get her from town A to town C as quickly as possible before Strahd comes and feeds on her a 3rd time and converts her into a vampire and ruins the world, right? And I thought that was very anticlimactic in terms of, or let me put it this way, it's very implausible for me as a 4th level character to be able to escort any NPC from town A to town C without a 13th level vampire lord doing whatever he wanted, right? And so it really stretched my suspension of disbelief to come into that situation with that premise. What I would suggest instead is that she either has been fed on once, or she hasn't been fed on at all, but she's been targeted, or it's somehow been foretold, and that as of a certain date, Strahd's going to start going after her. And then it suddenly becomes very plausible, okay, well, this guy's going to show up. He's not going to necessarily murder you because his main focus is I want to feed.
Yeah.
I want to corner her and, and inflict my feed attack and then get out.
And then your players can fail twice.
Right, exactly. And then they feel the time is running. Okay, well, then they feel like they have they have some experience with Strahd and what his tactics are and what his how he's going to fight, and also there's a reason for him to ignore them. They're just cattle fodder. They're not worth the fireball. They're not worth my time. So that's my main thing with that. With that adventure is to give the players a little bit of leeway in there. Supposedly it takes some of the time pressure off, but I don't think I think it's a far more satisfactory set of circumstances than, it's high stakes to have to deliver her, but it's also trying to, it's like, can you drive the ambulance? I know you're the paper boy. No, I can't. I'm 12 years old. Crash, bang, boom, boom. Everybody in the ambulance is dead. Sure.
There's also Grav Galati, who plays on Iron Keep, has been running that for a while with his group. And in his podcast that he does with Megan and Jordan, Experience Pointers, he talks about that a lot. And I think it's the episode on player death. He talks a lot about Curse of Strahd, so if you search up that episode, you can listen to his thoughts. He's got some really interesting ideas of how he introduced Strahd into the game and what happens when your your level 3 players attack Strahd.
Yeah. And I think the natural inclination for most GMs is oh, well, I have to use the stats on on here and da-da. And it's you can play the personality where he doesn't necessarily feel the need to do that. And
what he ended up happening is they attacked him and he basically walloped them. He left them alive but just barely, and then walked away but he did it with ease.
Yeah. It's a very fine balance to maintain, because on the one hand, Strahd is immortal and bored and wants these characters to become some sort of challenge that makes his life interesting. On the other hand, it can feel like the DM's just dicking with the party and making them his playthings. So it's very, very tricky. The other thing that came up here, Addicted Decoy said, how challenging about Santahar this last session? How challenging is it for you to get what you want from the players, to get them in the direction you want to go, but let them play out on their own? I think we talked about this a little bit. I mean, honestly, that's why I cut the session where I cut it, was because I didn't have a good set of options of here's why you should go on this adventure.
Yeah,
the players didn't have a good framework for well, if we're going to go on this adventure, here's what I want out of it.
Yeah, and And it's not always the case, but certainly with us and a lot of the people at Saving Throw in our shows, it's like we're here to play the game. So when you're like, here's where I'm pointing you next, we're not going to go, I don't know, let's go over here. I mean, we want to go on this adventure that he's laying out and preparing. So we're going to go on the adventure anyway. So, but it's like trying to find like the fun like role play aspects of how we get there.
I think too, to go back to the whole like, no one cares about your world building thing. I think that players are always motivated by what develops their character first and foremost, and then what's the easiest way for them or the most direct way for them to solve the plot next. And third is, let's explore the interesting world that the GM has created. And honestly, like most of the time, it's not that interesting, and also that kind of mode feels aimless and rudderless. Well, that's redundant, but it feels just sort of like without purpose of like, well, let's just go from city to city and see if anything cool happens, and that's not something that that's something that retirees do, right? That's not something that adventurers do.
Yeah.
So whenever you're setting up what's going to happen next in the adventure, like you have to like put into your brain space a little bit of like, okay, well, why is this personally like how does this personally involve each of the player characters, and what motivates them, as opposed to it's a cool place. It has God's fire in it. Yeah. Don't you want to go there? I don't know.
Yeah, but
do I?
And some of that's on us, the players, because I mean, my shift with Grayson in the past few sessions has been towards being a redeemer, and I think he targets like everyone for redemption, and the more unredeemable they seem to be, the more they're worthy of it. And certainly Santahar is somebody he would love to bring around into the fold of good, and this seems like an opportunity for him to continue that.
Yeah. So
it'll never happen, but
I think if there was I mean, the shortcoming on my preparation side, since we always say, okay, well, Thursdays where we talk about how things went wrong, and I think the shortcoming for me in terms of my preparation for this week's session was I should have drilled down a lot harder on, okay, how do we transition from this Xanathar Waterdeep scenario, and what hooks do I give the characters to get into Expedition to the Barrier Peaks? I should have focused a lot of time on that and then worked my way back through the session to the beginning of like, okay, you're standing on the top of the tower with Lady Rerolls Silverhand, right? Instead, I sort of started from the front and I was like, okay, well, we need to get into the tower. There's got to be some aftermath of Arathor having been, and they need to take possession of it. And let's have a fight here, a little showcase kind of thing that happens. That'll be interesting. And then we go see Xanathar.
Yeah.
Kind of like how I put it together in my mind. And instead, I did the logical thing, which is you start from the front and you're working your way towards the end of the session. But what I should have done was really started at the back and go, okay, let's get these hooks nailed down before we do any of this other stuff, which is honestly really sort of inconsequential. The dungeon fight was interesting, but it was really just sort of a set piece combat that was self-contained. It doesn't have a lot of rippling repercussions down the road. It was a good chance for them to flex their new abilities and whatnot, but having those personal hooks would have been a lot more.
Yeah, because it does.
Having that more thought out.
It was like this is basically the third transition from an adventure that we've done, and like the first one was. Tax Sister's trapped in a book. Well, we have to go to this place to free her. We all are on board with that. And then the next one was like we just happened to be at a play that seemed like it was just going to be like just a weird fight that we had that turned into a cult that we had to defeat. And this was like not as strong, but it still was wrapped in like everything. It wasn't just like the wizard shows up. He's like, I have an adventure for you.
Yeah. So I think in terms of my prep, like. And this is going to bleed through into next week, is like, so next week I need to do, again, well, now at this point we're sort of starting from the front and going forward, but I definitely need to make those hooks strong and then start planning out how the rest of the adventure unfolds, right? But yeah, in terms of in hindsight, like how do you get the players to go where you want them to go? You've got to give them a good, strong reason to get there, and not just because it's the only thing to do. That's where everybody struggles. Is like, well, but I made this place. And we go, yeah, okay.
Cool. Well, I'm going to be at the tavern until you tell us what to do.
Why would I go up onto that floating airship, which clearly is going to crash or explode anytime, like the minute.
When has anyone ever been on an airship that wasn't attacked by wyverns and crashed?
Yeah, it's gonna explode, and I'm only 3rd level. Why would I go up there? Oh, you'll be fine. Okay. So, to answer your question, Posh Panda and Shimixon, yes, Johnny Cake is basically just like cornbread. They're not. It's funny because that's my mom's term for it, and it's just cornbread, and I don't know why everybody had such a hard time latching on to like Johnny Cakes. What's that? Whatever. It's all good. All right. Well, we're 25 minutes over our time here, so I'm gonna wrap it up. Thank you so much for your input and your ideas and your questions. Appreciate it. Let's take a look at the calendar, shall we? So we're off tonight. I don't know if you're gonna go start up the new season of Critical Role. Tonight's the best time to do it. Tomorrow is off. Saturday is off. Sunday, GM Rick Budd comes back with a Doctor Who themed feeling, Lasers and Feelings. Tempting Fate. What is it? I think it's Tempting Fate, Doctor Who, Lasers and Feelings.
Yeah, if I'm reading that correctly, it's a Doctor Who themed. They're playing the Lasers and Feelings system, but it's Doctor Who themed.
I see. All right. Well, that's at 5:00. With special guest Mia Rosella and Sam DeLove and Gina DeVivo. Somebody else is on there, but I don't remember who, because I'm terrible at paying attention to anything that's not my show. Hey! Speaking of my show, I'll be back on Tuesday here at 2:00. Well, not here, hopefully. Well, it depends on whether Dom comes down with the rancid ickies or not. But yeah, I'll be back at 2:00. We'll talk about spoilery things in the Expedition to the Barrier Peaks. I'm looking forward to where this is going to go and getting into the meat of the adventure. So that's at 2. Next Wednesday, you'll be able to see all the action. So I don't know, Eric. You got anything? When you get any fun weekend plans? Monday is theoretically a holiday for some people, right? MLK Day.
Every day's a holiday when you have a job.
You're unemployed.
Yeah. I mean, I got a sketch show Saturday if you're in the LA area, which most of you aren't, so it's fine. But you can always. I've been picking up my Twitch streaming, basically doing that every day that I don't have something like this going on. So you can always check me out at my Twitch channel, Mostly Eric. Where I've been streaming a lot of Grand Theft Auto role-playing and stuff. So
is it ever not Eric? It seems like false advertising. It's
mostly Eric.
100% Eric, isn't it?
I mean, yeah, pretty much. Yeah, it's mostly. I mean, it was also my old. It was my current podcast. It was its old Twitch channel that we didn't use. Just was like, well, I'm not going to start a new one because this one already has some followers on it. So not that they'll ever watch, but you know.
Very good. Very good. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. Thanks to Farquaad and the rest of our mods for keeping the channel safe, friendly, clean, and accessible. Until next time, let's dungeon! I wasn't even prepared for this at all. 0 for... I don't know. Dom's already screwed up my average, so who cares? I'm 1 for 25. 225. 1. I'm 1.